Every year when May comes around, celebrations of World War II's Victory Day across the Western Hemisphere erupt, honoring the fallen, the victims, and those who survived such a turbulent time in human history less than a century ago. Each nation vaunts its own achievements on both the battlefields and also back home, how their nation persevered on all fronts. Some expectingly take more credit for the victory than others.
All over the globe, our World War II allies are celebrating this week, but the United States has never joined in with the proper celebration of our own, and the victory was mostly accomplished because of us, whether you like it or not.
The narrative that is most prominent and common is how the West was the savior of the world against fascist tyranny. Churchill, de Gaulle, Roosevelt, and Eisenhower, the British, French, and Americans were the true champions of freedom and in liberating the entire world from potential disaster. Relegated to secondary status within this narrative were the Soviets and Chinese who, regardless of their most extreme suffering and show of strength, became barely visible footnotes in Western history books and within the war's collective memory. And if we go further down the hierarchy of who shared in this combined sacrifice and suffering, we discover that there were many more soldiers who gave the ultimate sacrifice. Yet they don't belong to any one civic nation or country. Their nation was that of Islam. Any victorious nation can write its own version of history on any war. Its mythical accomplishments, its incomparable and absolute sacrifice, and its steadfast and unrelenting resistance to its enemy. The United States, Britain, and France all have their fairly similar versions, with each stressing or exaggerating how much influence or individual impact their armies had in getting the job done. The stories are many and repetitive, ingraining in all who read, hear, or see them the narrative that the West alone did indeed save the world. In the widely circulated and manicured imagery of the war, of the battlefields and cities, we seem to only witness white soldiers, writhing in pain, dying on behalf of the world, or playing hero against insurmountable odds.
Right. Go, Sarge, go! Right.
And maybe more recently, with the same imagery, some new minority groups peppered into the scenery here and there, for political correctness' sake. But who speaks for those who are invisible in this imagery? Those without a voice, whose story remains silent and unheard, who documents their suffering and sacrifice, who reminds all whom followed that this victory, so often usurped by Western circles, did have many more heroes that didn't necessarily fit the Eurocentric mold, not only in how they looked, not in where they were from, but in the faith that they represented, Islam. And I refer to this categorization of Islam as a group and nation because a large contingent of these Muslims came from lands that were not yet countries. True, there were some Muslims from these Western established nations, but a lion's share were from territories that were still under colonial rule. Beyond the war, these people and lands would gradually be released from colonialism, and each would have their own nationalistic identity. But the reason I group them all within a faith-based unifier is because of how this same West, later within the same century, would condemn Islam as a negative force in the world, would see itself supreme to both the faith and its followers, and would cast them as outsiders within a supposed free and just world. Picture this. You're a 22-year-old Moroccan Muslim, a peasant living in a rural part of the North African territory currently occupied by the French. You live with your young family alongside your parents. Your siblings and their respective new families as well live on the same farm. A farm that has been worked by your family for many generations. A conservative, humble, yet spiritual way of life. Out of the blue come these blue-eyed, blonde-haired French lieutenants, forcefully conscripting you and your brother into the French army. You're ripped away from your people, and soon you're training in a half-baked military encampment. And several weeks later, you're given a gun, some ammunition, a couple of grenades, and you're outbound on a boat to France. Your family has no idea where you're going. To be honest, neither do you. and you've lost all contact with your brother. Just 2 weeks later, you're on the front lines. Explosions all around you, bullets whizzing above your head. Dead comrades encompass you, and the singular thoughts that haunt your mind is, why am I here? And why am I dying for these people? This is the same exact story for hundreds of thousands of Muslims from across the colonially occupied territories. From Morocco to the west, and all the way east to India. Ripped away from their homes, from their families and lands, without an inkling of what was coming and what they were going to eventually be fighting for. Was it a nation? Was it an ideal? And what were going to be the consequences? When we examine the numbers, Muslims who participated in World War II as part of the Allied effort numbered over 5.5 million, while those killed in action aggregated to over 1.6 million. This casualty total far exceeds the aggregate of those killed from the United States, France, and the United Kingdom combined, the supposed victors of the war. Their figure stands at just over 1 million in total. An extra 50% of Muslim casualties of war, yet no one recognizes or hears of the sacrifice that was made by this nation of people. And when we look at the geographic origin of these soldiers, they came from all over North Africa, East Asia, and the Caucasus, and mainly from the colonies of the imperialist nations at the time, France and Great Britain. From the French perspective, Morocco, Algeria, Tunisia, and Syria were the nations whose fathers and sons provided frontline cannon fodder on behalf of the colonialist French. On the British side, men were conscripted from Egypt, Iraq, and Palestine, and of course, its crown jewel, the Indian subcontinent, to engage in both the European and the African war theaters. So why were there so many of this typology of Muslim martyrs fighting in the war? Obviously, from an imperialist perspective, the main element was that these soldiers were cheaper human beings, or less than human beings. They were Muslim, hence backward and uncivil. And in the case of a nation such as India, they were a dime a dozen, expendable. Same goes for many of the North Africans who suffered frontline casualties. The irony in Muslim involvement during World War II was in the fact that these soldiers were actually representing, protecting, and defending nations that were still their colonizers, experiencing the deplorable situation when beyond the war, these victorious and ungrateful imperialists would continue on with the same heavy-handed oppression of these Muslims for anywhere between the next 5 to 20 years. When I consider the hardships that these soldiers and their nations went through, I know it's difficult to say such a thing, but I believe their sacrifice was greater than that of the Europeans and Americans, purely because they had no business fighting this war. Their sacrifice was forced, unjust, unfair, and ultimately unnecessary in every aspect. They had no vested interests in such a war when compared to those with reason for involvement, be it for the protection or liberation of their home country, or due to an imminent threat that was about to be realized. Now, these Muslim martyrs, they weren't generals, they weren't photogenic, they weren't even known. They were the unknown soldier even before their eventual and unnecessary deaths. They were expendable in every sense of the word. Yet we remain oblivious to their sacrifice and that of their families and societies. Why? Because the world was not in a position to begin to forget about these Muslim martyrs' value, as there's not been an opportunity to remember their role in the Second World War in the first place. And this video is all about bringing their role and self-sacrifice to the forefront. It's about being honest, fair, and just, and to shed light on the collective sacrifice during such dark events in human history, and how these wars and victories don't belong to any one nation or people. All shared in the eventual sacrificial, painful aggregate, as all should be recognized in the successes when a righteous victor overcomes a vanquished evil.